Thanks very much, Tara Palita. It's very good to be back in Berlin and to be back speaking in the Buddhist Tor. I probably said that wrong again. I'll get it right one day. But it's very, very good to be back here again and to see this this class flourishing so well. This Saturday morning class. I've been coming to Berlin for quite a long time now, and this business of being the president, I do want to say something about that because it's such a weird word. It's not my preferred. I don't know what you call somebody who we call the president. Basically, every centre in the Tree Ratna throughout the world has one, and they tend to be a senior member of the order. And the way I see it is that I'm just a friend of the centre from outside. I mean, that seems to me to be the most important sort of function, really. Just a friend to the centre, to everybody who comes to the centre in principle. And I came to Berlin originally because of friendship. Arya Bandhu, who's the chairman at the back there, he lived with me and we talked a lot about Germany. He was exploring his roots when he lived with us at Padmavajra, and he said, well, let's go on holiday. And we started in Berlin, and then we went to some other places, and I immediately connected with here, and I even taught on that occasion, and I felt had a very strong feeling developed for the city and for this centre, for the activities in this centre. Coming from a little island in the North Atlantic, as we must describe Great Britain now. Coming to Berlin, you really do feel like at the centre of Europe. In some ways, you feel like you're at the centre of the world in some ways. Such an important city, and it's really good that we have a very flourishing Buddhist centre in this city. And the other thing I love about it is the sense of the internationality of this centre. I mean, in this class, I know there are many people from many different countries, different cultural backgrounds. I just love that. I just find that so inspirational that the Dharma, that Buddhism is affecting people's lives from so many different countries, and that means, of course, people looking at the Dharma from their particular perspective. Living in a little island in the North Atlantic, it's very, very important for me to be able to see the world through the eyes of other people and see how they practice Buddhism, how they practice meditation, how they practice the Dharma. When I encounter that, it gives me a lot of energy, a lot of inspiration and energy, a lot of stimulation. Because, of course, Buddhism, what we call the Dharma, the truth, the teaching, reality, it spread all over Asia, all over Asia. It wasn't just confined to one particular culture. And wherever it went, it always, not exactly adapted, but translated itself into the context of the culture. Even while maintaining and sustaining its own particular genius and vision. And, it's happening like that in the modern West, in the modern world, because the conditions of the West are sort of spreading everywhere in some ways, aren't they? If you think of, the way technology is developing, the way values are so-called values are transmitting. So it's very, very good to be here, to leave my semi-monastic environment. I haven't been out for a while. So it was very exciting landing in Berlin last night and being met by friends and, going and having our vegan currywurst and chips. Is it curry 36? Go and worship the local gods and goddesses. And here I am. And yes, I kept asking people here what I should talk about. And they always say, well, talk about what you want to talk about. Because I know some of you in this class, but most of you I don't know. And I know some of you are quite new to things. You're quite new to things. Maybe even some of you have come for your first time this morning. So in some ways, I don't quite know who I'm talking to. But the other morning in meditation, I thought, oh, I know, I'll do a talk on energy. Energy is always good. A specific teaching on energy, a traditional Buddhist teaching on energy, because it's so important in Buddhist practice, so important in meditation practice. You might be surprised to hear that. You might even be surprised to hear that the Buddhist life is an active life. We associate Buddhism with the meditating Buddha, quite rightly. But you could also associate Buddhism with the walking Buddha and the standing Buddha. You do have images in the East of the Buddha standing and walking, some of them, very strong-looking figures making the gesture of the gift of fearlessness, the gift of courage, because the Buddha spent a lot of his life walking. He expressed his enlightenment, the fullness of his wisdom and compassion through communicating to people, communicating his liberating message to people in all sorts of circumstances and situations. He was a wanderer. He had his patched yellow robes, and he walked from place to place begging his food, and wherever he went, he communicated, he taught. Sometimes a great long lecture, sometimes just talking, just sitting down with somebody and engaging with them, engaging with their concerns, and sort of introducing them to a way of practicing, a way of living their life that would lead in the direction of enlightenment according to their circumstances, and always giving a message of transformation. The Buddhist life, the meditative life in Buddhism is a life of transformation. I think it's important to understand that because, there's a lot of teachings on meditation, and there's so many, aren't there? And maybe that's a good thing. But sometimes you can get the sense that meditation is sort of about just simply accepting yourself. I mean, a lot of the sort of buzzwords these days is sort of, well, accept yourself as you are. You are good enough as you are. It seems people have a lot of problems with just with themselves. So I suppose that's why that language is so attractive. That's not actually the way the Buddha ever taught. Buddhist meditation practice is a turning towards virtue, a turning towards virtuous states of mind, skillful states of mind, skillful in the sense that they are to do with training in how to transform yourself in the direction of the Buddha's attainment. So it's a growth in awareness. It's a growth in mindfulness. It's a growth in wise attention. It's a growth in friendliness and loving kindness. It's a growth in compassion. It's a growth in understanding. It's noticing, when you meditate, well, these things that I'm entertaining will actually not help me, and these other things will help me in this movement. And the key word is skillful. It's not good or bad or good and evil. That's not the language. The language is more like you're a craftsperson. You have a craft. Your mind is your craft. Your life is your craft. You're like the skilled carpenter, or the Buddha says the skilled irrigator, channeling the waters, or the skilled chariot driver, to use an image that would have been around in his day, the skilled potter. But your medium is you. Your medium is you. Your medium also eventually will be other people, will be the world, but it begins with you. It begins with us. It begins with our mind. And whether you've been here for a while or it's your first time of practicing here, that's what you've encountered. You've encountered you. You've encountered your mind, and you've started to shape it. You've started to work with it. You've started to move it in a particular direction. And, you might have noticed that that's not always easy. Sometimes you may have sort of taken off. Maybe sometimes on your first time you have an experience of beginner's mind where suddenly, wow, this is it. You're off into expansive modes of consciousness that you hadn't sort of dreamed of. That can happen in meditation. But it might be, and it very often is, oh crikey, this thing called me, this mind, is very, very slippery, is very, very elusive. I mean, the Buddha said this in a famous discourse, how slippery the mind is, how frivolous it is. It alights on whatever it pleases. And it's so hard to tame, so hard to train, so hard to work with. And yet work with it we must, because it's only the trained mind that brings happiness. It's the mind itself that leads to a liberated life, or an imprisoned life, a creative life, or a repetitive life. So this is not easy because it requires tremendous honesty, self-honesty, tremendous truthfulness, and dedication and commitment. And yes, energy. Energy, surprisingly. Not a harsh, not a sort of really willed energy in the sort of negative sense, but an energy that, well, it should begin with a very natural responsiveness. So I'm going to give you a traditional teaching on what are called the 5 viryas, or the 5 energies. Perhaps I should just define my terms a little bit. The word virya, I'm translating it as energy, but you need to add a little bit more. It's energy in pursuit of the good, in the sense of the skillful. We can be addicted to energy, can't we? We love energy. I love energy. I was talking to somebody earlier who was saying they were feeling that they just didn't have any energy. And I was recovering from a cold the other week, and I felt so fatigued. And it's ghastly. There seems to be a lot of that around at the moment, where you're trying to put your foot on the gas and nothing's happening. There's something wrong with the accelerator, or there's just nothing in the gas tank. There's nothing there. And for a sort of reasonably high energy person like myself, that is a little bit troubling. Fortunately, I recovered. Maybe it was the prospect of coming to Berlin, but you can, even if you don't have that kind of energy, you can still have this energy in pursuit of the good or the skillful. So it's not just any energy, it's the energy that's dedicated to a life of developing virtue, to use that word, to moving in the direction of the Buddha's enlightenment, to develop these skillful, positive, creative qualities, the energy dedicated to transformation. Its opposite, of course, is laziness. It's very interesting, the discussion of laziness in Buddhist tradition. One teacher says there's such a thing as gross laziness. What's gross laziness? It's being addicted to such things as making money and subduing your enemies. In other words, business and politics. A lot of energy in that, but it's completely lazy, according to this tradition, because it's not energy which is really pursuing a meaningful life. So don't get the idea that energy is sort of running around headless, doing, just for its own sake, or even running around doing good. You can get that, can't you? You can get people who are very, very energetic, sorting people out, apparently, getting very anxious, very uptight, being a complete pain to everybody else, because they're always telling you what to do and what not to do. That's not what we're talking about. In talking about virya, we're talking about an energy which is dedicated to life's meaning. And life's meaning in Buddhist tradition is moving in the direction of the Buddha's enlightenment. So the first virya, and it's hard to translate the Sanskrit terms, it's usually translated as the virya that's ever ready, or the energy that's ever ready. It's roused up energy. It's something aroused in you. You've sort of stirred up your energy, if you like, your inspiration. This is really, really important, that all the energies come out of a state of inspiration, even a state of aspiration. And there's all sorts of ways in which this is discussed. But one of the ways it's discussed is that you realise that your human life is very, very precious. I mean, a lot of people don't have energy, or they don't have the energy I'm talking about, because they can feel rather helpless or hopeless, even a bit depressed. People can be very sensitive. They look at the world, they look at the state of the world, they look at their life, and they can just feel so dismayed, and sort of disillusioned, and even sort of hopeless and helpless. What's the point? Even feel sort of bad about feeling that. But Buddhist tradition says, look, all right, the world can be very problematic, but the thing is, you have this incredible thing called a precious human life form. This is so, so important. We've already got what we need. People can give human beings can give human beings a hard time in this day and age, but Buddhist tradition says no. A human life form is indeed a very privileged life form, not in the sense of having power over other forms of life. It's because you have a very special kind of consciousness which you need to value. Human beings have this reflexive consciousness, this self-consciousness in the best sense. We're not just trapped in sense experience. If we're trapped in sense experience, we're just going to react to stimuli, and we'll fight or we'll fly or whatever it might be. But we can reflect on our experience. We can reflect on, actually, this sort of behaviour is conducive to development, this sort of behaviour isn't. We can even reflect on the effect we have on other people. This is really important as human beings. It's the basics for Buddhist ethical practice. We have the possibility of reflecting on the impact we have on other people. Are we having a positive, beneficial impact on people, or are we having a negative, destructive impact on people? We can see that. We can reflect on that. We can even sort of have a sense that we could become more than we are. This is why we have the Buddha image. The Buddha image is to remind us that we have the potentiality, because of the special kind of consciousness that we have, if we use it, to actually move and change our life and take it in a radically different direction. So this is very, very precious. I mean, not only do we have this, we actually live in a world of comparative freedoms. We have the freedom to come to the centre this morning and meditate. We have the leisure, actually, to do that. I know, I'm sure many of you are very busy in your lives, but, there are some parts of the world where people have to work and work and work, where it's unending toil. We actually have the freedom and the leisure to come to this place, to meditate together, to enjoy one another's company, to give all our attention to doing what we need to develop on the path. So we need to rouse up our energy through reflecting on what we have, reflecting on the potentiality that we have, that we can really do something, that we don't actually have to feel depressed about life. One of the things we also need for this, I think, is good friends, what we call spiritual friends, kalyana mitras. It's so, so good to meet people who've dedicated their lives to this life and who can put us in touch with that. And this is what you find with the Buddha time and time again. He'd meet somebody, they'd be really down about life, really disillusioned with themselves, feeling that they were wasting their lives, that they really weren't doing anything. And there'd be this encouragement, just a few words, and of course the example of somebody who'd lived that life, and that would rouse them, that would stir them up, that would make them want to enter into this life. So first of all, we need to rouse our energies up. If you're struggling in meditation or in Buddhist practice, Look for your sources of inspiration. Why did you start this life? What were you searching for when you came along here? What are you looking for? If you're not sure what your life is for, ask yourself, what am I really looking for? And, where can I get the energy to go on this quest? And really look at yourself. Look at your, what am I really trying to do with myself? And don't lose heart. I'll come to that in a minute. It's so important to rouse up your energy. But that's not enough. I could sit here waffling on for ages about how wonderful we are as human beings and, this great Buddhist life is and all the rest of it, and make all sorts of vague, noises and lots of sort of pseudo-spiritual platitudes and so on. That you do encounter that, I think, in the spiritual world, so to speak. That the next virya underlies that's not good enough. Because the next one is called energy which is applied to work. Energy which is applied to work. There is a task. There is work. I've already sort of referred to it. You've already started to do it through meditating this morning. The word for meditation in Buddhist tradition is kammatthana, which means literally place of work. Place of action. I don't know what practice you did today, whether it was the mindfulness of breathing. Well, what was it, mindfulness of breathing? But you also, some of you have done Padmavajra, development of loving kindness. These are two of the many kammatthanas in Buddhist tradition, the places of work. So that's really, really significant that those old Buddhist masters used that language. You've got to bring that energy to the place of work. As I've said, you're shaping your mind. You're working with that material like a carpenter, like an irrigator, like a potter, like a painter. You're working on that material, which is you. You've got the form of the practice, which you're engaging with intelligently, applying it to your mind. And, that's work. And you know that sometimes, don't you? That you're sitting there and it's a kind of struggle. And some people say, oh, don't struggle, relax. Well, okay, relax for a bit, but it is a struggle. Anything worth doing, I think there's a Tibetan saying, if it's not tough practice, it's not real practice. If it doesn't take a lot of your effort and energy, a lot of work, then it's not real practice, it's something else. It's just making you comfortable with your particular version of what we call the samsara, of ordinary life. No, it's a place of work. So you apply intelligently that roused up energy to what you need to do. And it's not just on the cushion or sitting in the chair in meditation. The work has to go on outside. Sometimes people struggle in meditation and they want to know why they're struggling in meditation, why the method isn't working. Is there any sort of tip or trick that can sort of shift my mind so I can really concentrate and get that juice, that honey of higher meditative experience? And there are things, ways of working in meditation. Of course there are. All sorts of tips and little insights that you can apply and which you'll learn and you can talk about with meditation teachers. But you've also got to look outside. If you're trying to do the mindfulness of breathing and you have an incredibly speedy life, a very, very distracted life, you're going to have a really tough time looking at your breath. If before the class you've just spent hours on your phone, like looking at news feeds or, I don't know what people do. Well, I do because I do it myself. But it's going to be really hard just to sit down and just be with your breath, isn't it? I mean, that's going to be really tough. So you've got to start taking that awareness into your daily life, simplifying your life, reducing input if you can, spending time in silence, spending time doing nothing, spending time, going off to the countryside if you can, or just taking a pause in the day, just to do nothing. Or in relation to the loving kindness meditation, it's going to be really, really tough to develop loving, emotions in that meditation. If you're always falling out with people, if you're in conflict with people, or if your relationships are, really dull, if you're not actually having stimulating, really stimulating friendships going on in your life, really, really tough. You're just going to be emotionally dead. So if you're struggling in meditation, you've got to look at the place of work outside of the sitting meditation. You've got to see, well, what do I need to do, in order to work, in meditation more effectively? So meditation starts to overflow into life. And this is where the Buddhist path, or the traditional Buddhist, why the Buddha developed a whole load of practices. You have ethical practices, you have the precepts, the ethical guidelines, you have meditation. You also have wisdom practices, which begins with learning. It begins with learning what the Buddha actually said. You've got to start learning about how he saw life, if you're really serious about taking up this path. This will lead to a direct understanding of the way things are. So the place of work extends beyond sitting in meditation. Applying energy to the place of work will be, well, if you want it to be, it will be the whole of your life. Coming into all of your relationships, all of your connections with people. You experience it perhaps most strongly if you go on retreat. The centre here organises retreats, and it's good to go away for a weekend or a week or something like that and experience a total life for a while. Just to taste that, where each day is your place of work, is your kammatthana. It's your place where your energy is being applied to Buddhist practice. Okay, you're going along nicely. You've roused up your energies. You're applying that energy to Buddhist practice. You're going along, and maybe you even have some success. You feel something opening up in meditation. You're feeling sort of happier, and then for one reason or other it gets difficult. You lose interest maybe, or you just realise it's really hard. It might be that sort of things emerge in your life which are really hard to face, maybe in relationship to other people, just stuff. Stuff happens. Buddhist tradition would say, well, one of the things you activate in Buddhist practice is your past. And by the past isn't meant this life. It might be way back, all sorts of habitual material, which is very resistant to change, and you can lose heart. So the next energy, the next virya, is the energy that does not lose heart. It's a lovely expression in English. I don't know what the Sanskrit is, but it's so easy to lose heart, isn't it? You just, oh God, why am I doing this? Why on earth? It's just so hard, so difficult to make progress. That's what it can feel like sometimes. Really tough. I get used to it after a while. I think that's worth bearing in mind. You get used to losing heart. It just becomes part of the weather. I think I probably lose heart every day when I look at myself and look at my practice. There's a lovely introduction by Tara Palliser, but I do get very uneasy with this thing about I got involved with the Dharma when I was a teenager, and because I often say this, that you could ask me some very serious questions of how far I've got since I've been practicing since I was 17 years old, and I'm 66 now. I think that would be a very legitimate question. But anyway, you're not asking me any questions at the moment. But losing heart, I think, happens because this is a difficult life. Leading a life of complete self-honesty, and you're really trying to bring into existence constant awareness of the way things are, the way life is, its impermanence, its insubstantiality, the fact that there is so much overwhelming suffering. You're trying to bring into existence, great love and compassion and awareness consistently. Well, that's a big ask. That's not, you might be able to sustain it for a little while on a good day when the wind's in the right direction. But it's a hard life. So I'm not selling the Dharma very well, am I? I mean, deeply satisfying life. But, it's inevitable that you will lose heart. Again, loads and loads of stories about the Buddha where, there's a story, actually, it's somebody very early on in their connection with the Dharma. It's a story of Yasha, who was a sort of playboy, very wealthy, and he'd been partying all night, in his mansion, and he kind of woke up in the middle of the night and there's just one candlelit light, and he looks around at all the revelers around him sleeping and snoring and dribbling, and he just feels this utter disgust at himself and at life, and he just runs out into the night, runs and runs and runs, this complete waster, a real party animal, and he's shouting, it's horrible, it's terrifying, it's frightening. This is just like living in a cremation ground. It's just like living in the world of the dead. The sort of horror and squalor of him, basically. And he runs out into this parkland and he's shouting, it's horrible. And a voice just comes out of the darkness and says, this isn't horrible. This isn't frightening. And he just stops. And of course, it's the Buddha, just sitting in the night. And there's just he just gives him heart. He just gives him heart. And he says, okay, this is not horrible. This is not fearful. The Buddha says, no, sit down. Let me talk to you. And he applies him to work. He applies, what's happening to him to working in meditation. And sometimes that's all we need when we lose heart. We just need to be around somebody who has heart, and they give it to us. They put us back in touch with what's important. I've had an experience of that myself with my own teacher, with Sangharakshita. One time I was manning the telephone where I live at Padmavajra, and he phoned up to talk. Forget why he phoned up. It's still not clear to me why he phoned up. It's not even clear to me why I happened to be answering the phone that evening. I mean, it's a slightly bizarre situation. And he said, oh, how are you? And I said, well, it's really difficult, Bhante. I'm finding things really difficult. It's really hard making progress. I just feel that there's no progress. And he said, no, there is progress. And it's measurable. I said, well, no, I find it really... No, it's measurable. And he just kept saying the word measurable over and over again. I thought, I got the message, all right, okay, there's some measurable progress. And in a way, it was a bit fierce because I was feeling sorry for myself, because that's what happens when you lose heart, don't you? And he wasn't having that. He never had that. He said, no, measurable, get on with it. That was the sort of implication. But it was very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. And sometimes we need that. We need somebody to say to us, no, you're doing all right. Yeah, it's hard, it's difficult. Part of the problem is that we have, perhaps it's our Western, ideas of progress and career success. We bring that to, or educational success, we're highly competitive, individualistic Westerners. And we sort of expect results very, very quickly, and they've got to be really powerful experiences, kind of mind-blowing experiences of enlightenment and insight and higher levels of consciousness where your mind is just blown and, you've achieved a kind of privileged state. I mean, I've met a lot of people like that, who trying to convince me they're enlightened. I mean, next time you meet them, they've given up and gone back to a very worldly life. So that's part of the problem. We need to think much more in terms of the traditional Buddhist language of bhavana. Bhavana is one of the words for the path. It's a beautiful word, bhavana. It means literally making to become. Making to become. That's what it literally means. And it's this idea that life is a becoming. It's already a becoming. There's nothing sort of static in life. It's always moving. It's always changing. And what we have to do is sort of tap into that. And our life, our Buddhist life, is a gentle flourishing and growing. You use that word, flourishing, Tarapalita. Well, flourishing doesn't happen quickly. You know, maturing doesn't happen quickly. Ripening doesn't happen quickly. In nature, it doesn't happen quickly. It can appear very fast, but it's actually slow but steady. It's a movement. It's a development. Yes, maybe sometimes you do have those moments where something wonderful opens up, a wonderful sense of flourishing. But a lot of the time, it's just this wonderful incremental movement of change and transformation. Sometimes it's good to look back. Look back at how you were. Look how far you've come. We're often judging ourselves, well, with all sorts of strange criteria, sort of a weird idea of how we should be or what this Buddhist life should be, ought to be. And we especially do that with other people. Buddhists are very good at doing that with other people. But no, look back. Look back. You know, how far have you come? You're probably not the person you were. It might not be as wonderful as you expected it to be, but it's actually significant. And there's no reason why that can't keep happening. Actions have consequences. That's another, way of describing the Dharma, the way of describing the Buddhist life. Independence upon these conditions arises those conditions. There's no reason why this can't keep going. So give yourself heart through reflecting on how far you've come. That will give you, if there's nobody else around to give you that, as it were. I mean, sometimes other people have to tell you that. Crikey, don't give up because you've come such a long way. Please don't give up. I don't want you to be that person that was like that all those years ago. Please. Okay, you might have, you might have developed the energy that doesn't lose heart, but there's another energy, and it's called the energy that doesn't turn back. In a way, this is much more sort of subtle, really. You might be doing well in your Buddhist life. You might have been doing it for quite a long time. But it's very, very easy to settle down. It's very, very easy to sort of settle down into a sort of a good Buddhist life, what our teacher once called a positive rut. It's okay, it's good, you're a sort of reasonably happy, healthy human being with a bit of Buddhism going on. But it's a rut, it's a bit habitual, it's a bit stuck, it's a bit limited. And you're in it. You're in it is when something new opens up. Somebody comes along, say, with a new suggestion about how you could be, how you could live this life, or how you could run your Buddhist center or your retreat center or something like that. Or especially sometimes you get when you get older, you notice that you get sort of, younger people coming up and they're really almost like snapping at your heels sort of thing spiritually, and just through their sheer joie de vivre from practice, they sort of challenge you. And if you find yourself saying, hang on, we don't do things like that, that's not in the script. No, there are rules. There are ways to do things. Well, you can be pretty sure you haven't got the energy that doesn't turn back. You've reached a sort of limitation when you're like that. There's a very famous later Buddhist sutra, Mahayana sutra, called the White Lotus Sutra. And in this sutra, there's this tremendous sort of opening. The Buddha's going to give a tremendous new revelation of the Dharma, a new teaching, not given before. Everybody's very expectant, but I think it's about 500 of his so-called disciples. A new teaching? But we know everything. And they walk out. They turn their back on the Buddha. They don't want to know the new teaching. We didn't sign up for this. We didn't sign up for something new. We don't want that. And it's something you have to really watch out for if you've been practicing for a while. If you're it's good to get into a groove. It's good to get into to be established in your Buddhist practice. But it's very, very good to be shaken up. I mean, that's why it's good to have Buddhist centres, I think, and new people coming along. You actually do us a favour. You do me a favour because you'll be keeping us on our toes. And especially if you start asking awkward questions. Fortunately, I don't think there's going to be time for a question and answer session after this because you maybe have to do that in the break afterwards because your assumptions are challenged. And it's very, very seductive, especially if what can happen if you're not careful is that you might even have a few disciples and they think, you're something very special and all that sort of thing. So that needs to be shaken up all the time. There's a sort of personification of limitation in Buddhist tradition called Mara. Mara is sometimes called the Lord of Limitations. I think there are ladies of limitations, or lords and ladies of limitations. And it's when he's particularly strong when we think we've arrived. And that's why it's so, so important for our practice to be challenged and broken up. And again, I think retreats are really good for that. If you haven't been on a retreat, I'd really encourage you to go on one because it can really sort of shake up your Buddhist practice. You've got to keep it alive. You've got to keep your Dharma life as fresh as possible. And I think also getting involved in, when you can, when you're ready, and not just having your own Buddhist practice, but being involved in sharing Buddhist practice. I mean, there's a lot of people I know in the room here, not just the order members, but others I know who volunteer to help run the centre. I think that's a very good way of shaking up your Buddhist practice so it doesn't get complacent. Being involved in sort of helping the Dharma, Buddhism, meditation, to reach other people, where people ask you, well, what is all this about? What are you doing? That's a really good thing to get involved with. It keeps you fresh, it keeps you alive. And of course, in the end, Buddhist practice is all about doing it for others. This is what's called the Bodhisattva path, the Bodhisattva ideal. The Bodhisattva is someone who's dedicated to enlightenment, but for them, it can only be an enlightenment for all. They're not just interested in doing it for themselves. They want everybody, in principle, to have enlightenment. They want everybody to live this path, not in a sort of fundamentalist way, sort of forcing people into the Buddhist path, but sharing it and allowing people to have the opportunity to make the most of their precious human existence. So the next energy is the energy that's never satisfied. That's never satisfied. If you're on that Bodhisattva path, you're never satisfied. Not in a neurotic way. Well, no, I'm not satisfied. That's not good enough. No, a Bodhisattva is someone deeply contented, deeply at ease, because they're still pushing on in meditation. They're absorbed. They can be absorbed in the deepest of meditative experiences. They're not satisfied because they want to keep taking Buddhism into new situations, just like it happened in the Buddhist East, just like it's happening now. We want the Dharma, we want Buddhism to reach everybody, no matter how they see the world, how they see life. And that is never satisfied, and you're never satisfied because you've got to be ingenious, you've got to be creative. Because sometimes, very frankly, I'll be really honest, I've done, I have worked in centres a lot, and I do these retreats at Padmavajra, and, there are lots of different people coming along, and sometimes you think, how on earth am I going to communicate the Dharma to this person? They're really weird. And, of course, they think you're really weird as well. It's not one-sided. how do we communicate? How do we meet? How do we apply all this? It's fantastic. It's so stimulating and challenging. And every time you feel you sort of fail in a communication, you feel dissatisfied. You want to meet. You want to discover that common humanity, that common ground, that common spiritual potential. So you need a lot of energy to do this. In the end, you need what's called spontaneous, compassionate activity. That's the end of the Buddha's path. Spontaneous, compassionate activity. And our teacher once defined this, big moment. He's describing enlightenment. Spontaneous, compassionate activity. What's it like? You do what needs to be done. There's nothing between you and what needs to happen. There's no egotism in you, no bias. So you do what needs to be done. You're highly responsive, highly attuned. And this kind of energy, this kind of love is, I can use the words, but it doesn't really, it's unimaginable. So I'm going to do an old-fashioned thing that we always used to do in the old days in talks. Lalita Ratna will remember. I'm going to leave you with an image of energy, of enlightened energy. Not the Buddha, a figure you've probably, maybe some of you have heard of, comes from the Tibetan Tantric tradition. It's a form, one of the 8 forms of a very famous figure called Padmavajra. And his name is Dorje Drollo, which means something like adamantine sagging belly. Because he's got a sagging belly, which of course is the symbol for emptiness. The realization of emptiness is a sagging belly, fortunately for us, Lalita Ratna. Yeah. But he's deep red. It's almost like a black red, like a maroon, really deep red. He's, as I said, he's very stout. He's not sitting down. He's sort of dancing above a pregnant tigress, which is the most ferocious of animals imaginable, which is highly explosive and volatile. He rides this creature above a sea of rakta, which is blood, which is the great bliss. If you like, it's the lifeblood of spiritual life. He's enveloped in the flames that destroy the world at the end of the eon, an absolute destructive blaze. He has 3 bulging eyes, one in the middle of the forehead, dreads, great, thick, orange, matted dreadlocks around his back, down his back. He's wearing a garland of 50 freshly severed heads. He's wielding a thunderbolt and a dagger, and he is the expression of utterly untrammeled energy, enlightened energy. It sounds like a very destructive figure. Actually, it is an extremely precise figure. It's this tremendous blaze of creative energy, and the deep red colour is the colour of this spontaneous love and compassion. He has 3 great, terrible oaths, which are really good to practice, really good to reflect on, especially when things are particularly challenging and demanding. And they go like this, the expression of this enlightened energy. Whatever happens, let it happen. Whichever way it goes, let it go that way. I really don't need anything. There you go.